Hey everybody, this little bottle contains an absolute miracle. It'll help you start your day off feeling great and with a ton of energy, even if you've had a couple of drinks the night before. zbiotics.com/reach, you'll get 15% off. Hey everyone, welcome to Narrative Live. We're so grateful you're with us tonight. Over the last few weeks, we've been at the forefront of the coverage of the McGonigal Affair, the biggest FBI spy scandal in history. This is the story of a supervising counterintelligence agent who lands up working for a Russian oligarch named Oleg Deripaska, and also turns out to be freelancing on the side as a dirty tricks operative for the Albanian prime minister, shaking down politicians, creating crime, corrupting democracies, and making a lot of money along the way, it seems. McGonigal has been arraigned on charges of not disclosing information, but our research has led us to believe that McGonigal's actions were far more serious, potentially a part of an effort to destabilize the Balkans, disrupt its fledgling democracies, and perhaps allow Vladimir Putin to reignite the Serbian war. 2 weeks ago, we revealed there were as many as 4 former federal agents involved in the McGonigal affair, including McGonigal. And last week, we took a closer look at the cases he was assigned in the last 2 years he served at the Bureau. These were 2 years where the Bureau had arguably its most important cases ever, the Trump-Russia case and the Hillary emails case. The overarching concern? Could a former FBI agent who landed up on an oligarch's payroll have impacted the investigation into 2016? Over the last few weeks, we've assessed this spy scandal as the biggest in decades in the FBI history. Now we believe it's the biggest in the history of the FBI. It may even be the biggest spy scandal in the history of the United States. And with that, let's welcome Eric Garland back to the show, futurist, a best-selling author, and the host of Game Theory Today, I believe it's now called. How are you, Eric? It's good to see you again. Thanks for joining us in the special edition.
Glad to be back. And yeah, it's pretty bad when you, it sounds pretty bad when you put it that way.
Yeah, it does. It's a pretty big story, isn't it? I mean, I noticed that the mainstream media who have been trying to avoid it actually landed up doing some service to it over the weekend and also this evening, which is good to see that there is, some attempts to put it back into the limelight here. This is I believe, a fundamentally huge story that is going to really, shape the FBI going forward. Because, their argument is, just to give them a point of purview here, is that they say, hey, we're the guys who caught him. We're the guys who investigated him. We're the guys who put him, indicted him with these 2 strong indictments. That doesn't work for me so much because, what if there's more that you didn't catch or you don't want us to see? And that's where it gets into tonight's show, which we'll look at, the various aspects from Steele to Wiener and to see whether those cases were impacted.
I mean, the breadth of this scandal is what makes it. And it, it brings us back to a year that, is getting further away, but, that we still need to cover, which is 2016.
Right.
Some of this goes back to 2012. Some of it goes back to 1912, actually. But, on a day when the Fulton County, Georgia special grand jury just reported and said, hey, the election was clean, but the witnesses were dirty.
Yeah.
So that the entourage around Donald Trump messing with the 2020 election, it looks like the prosecutions are just happening. But we're still dealing with how Trump got in office to begin with, which seemed to have quite a bit of support from the FBI, which is not what they're supposed to be doing. So back to 2016 we go.
It's kind of ideal that both of us are here to do this tonight because, we were among the 2 who first sort of stumbled on the Trump-Russia story in 2016 and put it out there in our different ways. You had that incredible tweet that is now, according to the New York Times, the number 14th most impactful tweet of all time. Wow, Eric, that's pretty big. Well done on that.
Such an honor. It's almost as good as the Pulitzer.
It's pretty good. I got to say, even better than the Pulitzer. But, it does put you in prime position to really assess of, when we sat there in 2016 looking at this potential crisis, did you think any of the years that followed that, with Mueller and with the FBI and everyone else trying to investigate this particular case, I was always so um, frustrated by the efforts of the Department of Justice and the FBI to come anywhere near close solving this. I just felt like, what's going on? Why are they missing so much?
Well, that is a lot of why I came out so early with that thread on Twitter and in a fairly complete form about what was going on, because I was so alarmed by the inaction. I have a lot of contacts, around the world, and quite a few in the U.S. government. And I've been doing intelligence for 25 years now, and I have people that know things. And so when something like super alarming, like Queen's mobster becomes president, and states that we didn't think were going to go that direction, went that direction, you start calling around and asking, all right, so what's going on? And the most alarming thing was not, this guy Trump's connected to all this stuff. He's got this son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who's coming with him. It was, I'm not sure what's going on. What do you mean you don't know what's going on? Nobody knows what's going on. That's big. What do you mean nobody knows what's going on? And basically, there were a lot of people who were panicking, but now I kind of realized there were a lot of people who were in on it. And so the inaction was the strategic point, I think.
I think so. And as we'll discover tonight, the constant spotlight on her emails was also very much a strategic effort, I think, on behalf of both the FBI and others, which is very, very troubling. We should tell people why would we think that this is even a reason to go back to 2016? Well, I mean, clearly McGonigal was on the payroll of Oleg Deripaska, who's a key player in 2016, and therefore just you want to go back and just take a look to see if there was any damage caused by the guy who lands up on the payroll of Putin's favorite oligarch. But also he was directly involved in 2016. I'm not sure people have quite landed on this notion that Charles McGonigal was the guy who received the tip that launched Crossfire Hurricane. He was on the receiving end at headquarters when the Papadopoulos claimed that there were thousands of emails being held by Russia that were going to be used to help Donald Trump. It landed up on McGonigal's desk. And that's where Crossfire Hurricane, the big investigation at the FBI, came from. So that's not nothing. That's the origin of the biggest investigation in FBI history, one would think, or close to, excluding January 6th. And then, at the same time, we think it landed on his desk because he was also responsible for investigating the GRU hack of the DNC, which, in his portfolio as the section chief in charge of cyber counterintelligence in DC, that investigation, I think, fell under his purview as well, though I can't confirm that part completely. It does seem to make sense, which is why the tip that came from Papadopoulos landed up on his desk as well. So you've got two big aspects of the Trump-Russia probe that were probably under his purview before he even got to the New York field office, when he was at FBI headquarters as the section chief of cyber counterintelligence. I think that's enough to say, hey, we should go back and look at all those investigations, because it's our democracy, it's our judicial system, it's our Federal Bureau of Investigations. If there's anything wrong in there, we better find out before this happens again.
It's hard to imagine anything worse. And, I think you referred to him as a supervisory agent. The place he ended up as the head of counterintelligence in the New York office, which is, perhaps tied, or perhaps more important with the Washington field office for being the most important place for analysis of Russian counterintelligence, because primarily of the Russian mafia being so close in Brooklyn, but also the United Nations being there, and it being just America's, largest and most important city. And, he rose to head of counterintelligence there, which would have meant he had access to, countless of the highest, security clearance requiring secrets that we have. He would have known the identities of all our various moles, all our various sources. He'd know the progress of all kinds of investigations. And to find out that once he was placed into that high position, the same month that somebody at FBI was feeding the aforementioned New York Times false information about Trump and Russia.
Mhm.
And let
Absolutely.
me just go back and
Yeah, go for it.
highlight that while you get the smirk about the 14th most important tweet,
Mm.
it was once again a negative frame about me and my revelations of that day. It was like, I think the comments were, it's proof that baby boomers will believe anything they read on the internet. I was like, or it was an outline of the Mueller report
Yeah.
2.5 years in advance.
Or you shouldn't
Uh,
believe everything the New York Times says about you anyhow. But I'll take
right.
or anybody else for that matter. They're not exactly the
But,
most respectable of publications these days. But anyhow,
nah.
just to
But,
support you that.
yeah, I mean, and they're in no position to be chucking rocks here, because the month that this McGonigal guy ascends to that position at FBI, they run a story saying investigating Trump, they find no connections to Russia, which is like investigating ocean. They found no connections to moisture.
Yeah.
Like, it's not to say that he's only connected to Russia. He has lots of dirty connections, but you got a couple Russia contacts there. Um,
You know what?
you
We're
know,
going to dive right into that timeline, is because that's a big part of what we'll do tonight. Is just look at that timeline throughout July all the way through November, and the number of times that you find Jim Comey intervening, and or the FBI commenting to the New York Times, or it becomes very clear in hindsight that the level of intervention was completely inappropriate, but actually fundamentally changed the course of the elections, I believe, in 2016. We have to do two things. Let me finish your thought there, because then I want to take a little break, and then we'll do the rest of the stuff that we have to do.
well, just that McGonigal in October of 2016, that's when Comey puts McGonigal at the top of New York, counterintelligence, and then like immediately after, the guy goes gallivanting off to Albania and the Balkans and
Yeah.
all these terrible places doing terrible things. So it could be Comey is not our homie.
It could be. This chart is really interesting, because this is the four actual former federal agents that are connected to the McGonigal affair in different ways. Two of them have not been charged. Mark Thomas Rossini has been charged in a different case in Puerto Rico, but I suspect he's flipped. But Louis Bladel is an interesting guy, because he is the guy who preceded Charles McGonigal in the post of the special agent in charge of counterintelligence in the New York field office. So everything that was going on up until Charles McGonigal is also tainted by the scandal, because Louis Bladel, when he was working at Ernst & Young later on, went to dinner with the Albanian prime minister and Charles McGonigal, and got a deal from the Albanian government for Ernst & Young. So there's even more, not as direct corruption as there was in McGonigal's case, but there's another former federal agent who had the senior job, who, according to these indictments, was also, being lured by the Albanian prime minister and whatever, former intelligence agents he had with him. So, the two things that are really worth keeping in mind there. That's the other guy, Thomas Fitzgerald. He landed up with $2 million in his bank account. No one seems to explain. Which, yeah, wouldn't that be nice if that happened? So I got to take this break. On the other side of this, we've got so much more. We're going to go through all the details of this. There are so many fine details that you need two geeks like Eric and me to really go through this. We've lived it. We'll talk a little bit more on the other side of this. Hey everybody, it's Zev from Narrative. This is the most romantic week of the year, and you know what that means: dinners, dates, drinks, and more. And sometimes those celebrations can leave you feeling a little worse for wear the next morning, if you know what I mean. Well, I have discovered an absolutely brilliant solution for that. It's called Z-Biotics. It's a pre-alcohol probiotic, and it's a miracle formula that allows you to have a few drinks at night without getting those awful post-drinking blues the next day. No need to worry about safety. It's all natural and FDA compliant. You can get Z-Biotics for 15% off your first order with my code REACH, R-E-A-C-H. I recommend getting the 6-pack. That's what I got, and it's a great deal, and you'll have a couple of extra to share with your friends. Click the link in the description box or scan the QR code on the screen right now and use code REACH, R-E-A-C-H, at checkout. Go to zbiotics.com/reach and get 15% off, plus 100% money back guarantee if you're not satisfied. Make this date night one even Cupid would be proud of. Get some Z-Biotics today so you can still feel the love tomorrow. I like that. Indeed, it's a good product. I highly recommend it, although I don't really drink, but don't tell anyone that.
The
It's funny. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just thinking, we're talking about lethal spies, and by the way, here's a hangover cure. It links up for a lot of our audience. Probably.
If you sometimes this stuff does drive you to drink. Not in my case right now, but it's true. There's been moments in the last few years where I've like, oh my gosh, I need a drink. So
Patton Oswalt, the great comedian Patton Oswalt, did a great bit where he's talking about what happened after Trump got elected. He goes, you could hear the sound of all those AA, Alcoholics Anonymous chips, like boom, being spun across a pond, like see you in 4 years.
I mean, for sure, it was a dramatic moment. Let's look at this timeline. This is a good timeline to start with. So, it's all started with this George Papadopoulos hit. It was a tip. Let me put this full screen so everyone can see it clearly, because I know it's hard for me to read, so it must be hard for you guys. Let me do this way. Sorry. Here we go. So there's George Papadopoulos in April the 26th of 2016, and he's letting it be known that from Mr. Professor Mifsud, is his name? Joseph Mifsud.
Maltese. Mifsud.
Yeah. He gets this tip. He gets this tip from Mifsud that there's Russians are ready to help with thousands of emails that they've got from Hillary Clinton, and they would love to help the Trump campaign with that. This time Papadopoulos was already a member of the advisory council to Donald Trump, and he shares that information with Alex Downer, who's the Australian High Commissioner to London at the time, which is like their ambassador to London, and he tells him, hey, listen, the Russians are going to help us with all this dirt. That's kind of crazy and amazing. I don't know why you would tell him that, but there you go. Alex Downer tells his government. The government goes to the legal attaché of a American embassy. An American embassy legal attaché takes down the notes and identifies that the tip needs to go to. Firstly, they check with the Philadelphia office counterintelligence department, because that's where their contact were. But that guy at the counterintelligence department said, "Hey, take it up to this section chief in Washington, D.C., Charles McGonigal." And that is how, we got to the point where Mr. McGonigal became the recipient of that first tip. Now, but you might think, hey, that's really, what's wrong with that? That sounds like a legitimate chain of events. And it might be. I mean, it might just be that that's fine and that there's no connection between McGonigal and Papadopoulos. I mean, it's interesting to me that Papadopoulos was identified by the Mueller investigation as potentially being an Israeli agent. Now, Robert Mueller never went there. He never said he is. But, Papadopoulos himself said that Mueller was investigating his Israeli ties, not his Russian ties. So maybe he's an agent. Maybe he was an agent. Who knows? Maybe he's an agent for the Israelis. And then it would be interesting if he called up and landed up this, if that tip was an Israeli agent generated tip that was fed into the Australian High Commissioner and then fed all the way into Charles McGonigal. That's interesting to me, because it did suddenly become the reason to have an investigation.
Actually, this is just occurring to me. There's a couple things. First of all, that the tip went to the Philadelphia field office for counterintelligence is weird, because why did they have jurisdiction? They
didn't really. The person who made the call, the legal attaché who made the call, just had a contact there, and she thought, well, let me call them and figure out where the GRU cases landed, because no, they weren't clear where the GRU case has landed.
That can happen. I mean, like if you're I live in St. Louis. If you happen to know anybody downtown here and go, hey, where would this guy learn about this thing with this Armenian guy came back? Which way do I go? And they go, Seattle or whatever. That would be okay. If they have some special deal over there, I got some questions. But here's the thing. And this points to some of the weaknesses here. If it's FBI counterintelligence's job to know a guy like George Papadopoulos starts working for a political campaign, whether or not he's working as an agent, a witting agent on task for a foreign power, if they knew that he had a chance of being that, they don't prosecute those guys. The point is not to prosecute. Prosecution is a huge problem in counterintelligence because you have to give up sources and methods. You have to do disclosure to the defense attorneys. It's a mess. Also, a lot of the actions they may be taking might not necessarily cross clearly over a boundary for a felony that you can nail them on. What they do is neutralize. They figure out some way to get rid of this guy, tell him that they know who he is, pull his source of money. They neutralize a guy and get him off the campaign. And that probably happens in every campaign at the presidential level, that there's somebody who's working, maybe they're an intern, maybe they're the campaign manager, and they get convinced to exit stage left. But somehow Papadopoulos, they were all allowed to just run the Trump campaign with minimal interference.
They really were. I mean, that's a really good point you're making, that Manafort was allowed to survive for quite some time. It was only until the New York Times published the ledger from Ukraine that he was suddenly exposed. But we all knew beforehand where his origins came from. We always knew who he worked for. So the FBI did sort of stay away from interfering in these campaigns, at least internally, but in the public space, they kept interfering. I mean, because that's
the point. It's sort of like they were not hands off with starting off these investigations of Hillary's emails and going public. A few days before the election, they had no fear of letting everybody know that they were involved looking over the presidential election in terms of the candidates. But they seem to have been very light-fingered when it came to all the operatives around, and there were many.
Yeah, the entire campaign
in both campaigns. Yeah, in both campaigns. Thank you.
That's true. So you get to May, and then there's the hack of the DNC. What do they retrieve? They retrieve emails that they then are threatening to release through WikiLeaks. Then July 5th. This is there were so many email cases. I had to go back and write this down because. The first case that was the email case where Comey sort of interfered was the servers were in her basement where she was storing her State Department servers, right? She emails. She was using a home server to basically keep her State Department emails. Apparently a big deal. Comey shows up on July 5th with this incredibly long, I won't play it this time, played it last week, long speech about how she didn't commit any crimes, but boy, it's bad. And, she should have been so careless. And, it's really sort of naughty Hillary. So it leaves a mark in your brain that, hey, this isn't really cleared up. It's just like they're not charging her, but they don't like what she did. Then soon afterwards, WikiLeaks.
Hold on that. I challenge any American over a certain age to go back in time and tell me one thing that Bob Mueller, Louis Freeh, William Sessions, any of the prior FBI directors said during a campaign ever. And go poll the American people on how many people know who the FBI director is at any given time. It's like nobody. And typically they keep their lips zipped. And also at the director level, to be involved in an investigation like that, directors that's an agency, 35,000 special agents, 15,000 analysts, offices all over the world. The director is directing like change management, like what the future of the capabilities of the agency are going to be. Yep. They're not down going, well, what kind of computer did she have? Did she have a Hewlett Packard? Did she have a Mac? No, there's 40 levels of people down beneath that. So that what strikes me, this whole pattern is like, it's interesting. It always comes back to this group of guys that all kind of know each other from the 90s.
Oh yeah,
in New York.
Funny you should mention that. That's just this whole group of guys. I didn't include Comey there, but this is the class of 96. I think basically you've got James Kallstrom's New York FBI office. That and we all know James Kallstrom is very close to Rudy Giuliani, very close to Donald Trump.
I was class of 96, but this one is more notorious.
Yeah. And I mean, you look at the guys that showed up there. I mean, there's quite a lot of people. Louis Freeh, who later on becomes very wealthy somehow. Even Rudy became very wealthy. And so we know that Rudy and Trump kept in touch with these guys through the FBI union. They were when they were no longer in their positions of power, they supported the FBI union through very large donations. And I think Kallstrom ran the union for a long period of time. So, there's a way that there's a connection between the FBI New York office, which seemed to outlive their time in office. Interesting. I mean,
I thought we as the American taxpayers kind of covered their pensions and their.
Yeah, the union is the union. It does. I don't know what the union does. I have no idea. Supports, legally defends them or something. I don't know. But it's a lot of money that they get in that. So it is interesting that all these people landed up knowing each other from back then, and they were all covering the Russian mob thing that was happening back then. That was the big thing that was happening. So they were in Brooklyn, covering all the stuff then. So that's interesting to me that, all these guys would have known all these characters from the mob world, from the Russian mob world, ages ago. But let's get back to the timeline just to keep us moving along here. So then you've got the WikiLeaks actual email release. So wild that it happened just 3 weeks after Comey's press conference, and just at the same time as they were readying to launch the Crossfire Hurricane. I mean, it just all seems so neat, doesn't it? It just makes you go, there's so much.
Can I do a little mini media rant here, though?
Yeah.
If you go to my YouTube channel and go back to live stream that I did with analyst Josh Faust in I'm going to say 2010, when Manning did the first theft of data from the Pentagon and hands it to this Australian dude, Julian Assange. I'm on record there going, that's not journalism. And everyone came out and they're like, oh, there was maybe a war crime here. It's like,
no,
Pentagon hard drives are not journalism. Then 3 years later, this dude from the NSA walks out of Hawaii, flies to Hong Kong, and then flies to Moscow. And the media just covers it. Oh my God, this is journalism. And I'm on record going, it's not journalism. It is not journalism. But everyone's like, no, this is how journalism is done. These people were just telling us a story. And then all of a sudden, and then 2016 comes up 3 years late after that. And therein basically intervening on behalf of Donald Trump. And the media kept still taking them seriously and not revisiting, wait, those are the guys that we covered saying that we were just trying to make sure that America ran a good government. And here we are supporting a Queens mobster for president. That's maybe we went wrong. Nope. Everybody treated it like this is a totally serious journalistic effort. And fuck those guys. Sorry.
Look, the media have a lot to answer for. I mean, even this timeline itself, it was breathlessly covered by the media, and they still do it today. I've only seen one major story on McGonigal since it started on the mainstream media. There are things they love, and there are things they don't love. This is one of those things they did love, and they covered it a lot. Now, I just went and highlighted the word email here because it's the same chart, but boy, look at all the emails that were floating around. I mean, this is clearly an attempt to make the emails for Hillary Clinton an issue throughout the entire campaign, even though she was cleared in July 5th. So, everything is email related. There is so much to talk about Donald Trump and Russia, but all they can talk about is emails for some reason.
Hey, Zeb, if I want compromise on someone, do you know what I want?
What?
The bank records.
Yes, not the emails.
Show me the bank transfers. Show me the money offshore. Show me the names of the LLCs, and I will give you those people.
Yeah.
But there's an email, and maybe they used Comic Sans font, or they used super 20-point type. Is really bad.
Yeah, it's really, and I mean, the thing is, the emails were negligible, not that interesting after all, anyhow, as we found out. But it didn't stop Jim Comey from coming out on October the 30th and to say, oh my gosh, I have more email news for you. Because the Wiener laptop, we found some emails that were backed up from Hillary's hard drive, and now it's in the last week before the elections, and we're just going to spend the next week obsessing about this with you guys, and then clear it on November 6th. I mean, this timeline is even more suspect than the previous one. And, it's, let me put up October for you here, and you can get a sense of how insane this last month was. You had October the 4th, McGonigal arrives, or at least is announced as a new job at the New York field office. Then October the 7th, the Clinton campaign puts out their pussy tape. And then the Trump campaign, or at least WikiLeaks, responds with the Clinton email dump right afterwards and is able to sort of retrieve the narrative. So it was like a 1-2 punch, but hey, look who did it. It was the WikiLeaks who ended up responding so quickly. Then there's the second debate. And I think I have a clip here of October 9th. I hope it's the right clip. If not, I'm going to find it for you in a second. Let me see if this is the right one.
I don't know, Putin. I think it would be great if we got along with Russia because we could fight ISIS together as an example, but I don't know Putin. But I notice anytime anything wrong happens, they like to say, the Russians, she doesn't know if it's the Russians doing the hacking. Maybe there is no hacking, but they always blame Russia. And the reason they blame Russia is because they think they're trying to tarnish me with Russia. I know nothing about Russia. I know about Russia, but I know nothing about the inner workings of Russia. I don't deal there. I have no businesses there. I have no loans from Russia. I have a very, very great...
Hey, he's annoying. I'm going to stop him there, actually. That wasn't the right clip, and I can't listen to him anymore. Can you imagine if I had to sit through another
it's
round
part of
him?
his genius there of he just wordsed at you. The words would just, and then you're like, stop, you can have what you want. And
Yeah, and so this is the one where he actually does talk about, this is in October, he's talking about her emails and about the FBI and her emails. Listen to this very carefully.
I didn't think I'd say this, but I'm going to say it. And I hate to say it. But if I win, I am going to instruct my Attorney General to get a special prosecutor to look into your situation, because there has never been so many lies, so much deception. There has never been anything like it. And we're going to have a special prosecutor. When I speak, I go out and speak. The people of this country are furious. In my opinion, the people that have been long-term workers at the FBI are furious. There has never been anything like this, where emails and you get a subpoena, and after getting the subpoena, you delete 33,000 emails. And then you acid wash them, or bleach them, as you would say, a very expensive process.
The long-term workers at the FBI get a special mention in the October 9th press debate because they're so upset about the emails that Hillary Clinton is supposedly acid washing or whatever it was she was doing. I mean, what are the chances are that he's really, I mean, he's not concerned about the long-term workers at the FBI. He is plain out just dog whistling to them and saying, go guys, I think. I mean, why else would you mention the long-term workers at the FBI?
I don't know. I mean, though, first of all, and again, there's so many. If you rolled the tape longer, maybe he unsaid that, or he
said it. I think he was.
No, I mean, he said it, but
yeah.
You know what I mean. He can be hard to track on that. But does that sound like the story about Trump once he became president was like, he's an idiot. He says a lot of stuff that they would make fun of him for being an idiot on, that I think is him winking at various groups of people. Like, for example, remember when COVID comes out and he's doing these press conferences with the scientist guys, and there's a lot of propaganda about Bill Gates being somehow behind the COVID stuff. And he's like, maybe you could just get a light and you shove it in somewhere and everyone's, and that'll take care of the COVID. Ha, 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 ha. And everyone laughs about that. And then you find out that there are patented technologies to kill viruses of that type with a certain frequency of UV light. So it turns out that that's not that stupid, but maybe people don't know that. And maybe somebody's commercializing one of those technologies in order to make money off this. And that's look, this guy was around the mafia his whole life. The real serious power players, they threaten your life with 3 words. Just that thing, over there. That's his native dialect.
Yeah,
is just saying 3 things. Well, your cousin, and so he would do that. So that that he name checks the FBI. Like, well, there's those long termers that, like, I know who you are.
Yeah.
I know you guys. I
I
know
know
what
what you
you're
guys
doing.
are doing for me, maybe, because the next few weeks rolls out a process of pre-billing for the James Comey, Wiener laptop reveal. Go ahead. You say so.
Well, I was just thinking that's also around the time that he would have been receiving candidate briefings. So he would have been receiving top secret briefings around that time.
Yep.
So he might have been in a position to wink at a few folks.
October the 25th, out comes Lara Trump, and she's on Fox and Friends saying, there's an October surprise coming, everybody. There's an October surprise. And it's just a few days towards the end of October. Rudy Giuliani, the next day on Fox, says, I think he, meaning Trump, got a surprise or two that you're going to hear about in the next few days. I mean, I'm talking about some pretty big surprises. And then Eric Prince on Breitbart says, with Steve Bannon, and the NYPD and the FBI had forced FBI Director Jim Comey to release the emails or they would go public with their revelations. So even he's talking about a rogue FBI forcing the FBI director's hand and forcing him to then ultimately release this crazy letter that he does. And there's a series of things that happens between October 28th and November 6th, which are quite stunning. The thing on the very left is the first letter where he says, hey, we have to reopen the case because maybe some of these emails on Wiener's laptop are relevant to the Hillary Clinton investigation, which, by the way, they had known weeks earlier were not relevant at all because they'd already done the check of the metadata. They already knew that it wasn't relevant. They were just doing extra checking, I guess, over this period of time. And then the next day or 2 days later, this shows up that they got a warrant to look at all these emails. And in that article, I'll just throw it up for you just so you know I'm not making things up here. I think I showed it to you earlier, but it says here that some of Mrs. Aberdeen's emails passed through Ms. Clinton's private server, officials said, which means there is a high likelihood that the FBI has already read them. Apparently, it's pretty much well known that they had been already read, that they knew exactly what was similar in her emails versus the one that are on the laptop. And then it also says in this next paragraph, they said it was possible that the review would turn up nothing, but said investigators felt obligated to check it. Really? By what? By whom? They knew it was a backup of her BlackBerry. It wasn't like, ooh, surprise.
And you can there's a program that you can run a comparison of those two data sets that takes about 2.2 seconds. So
yes, which apparently took a long time for the FBI to make up to build.
And who investigated this again? Who was the one who did the interview?
Strzok. So Peter Strzok, who is the one of these.
Oh, I know exactly.
Yeah.
Zeb, I know exactly who he is.
You do know who he is.
Because Pete, I don't know if the audience ever heard this, but Pete Strzok interviewed me in 2011. I debriefed with him over being targeted by the Op Ghost Stories Russian agents.
That's the what? That was the.
They refer to Anna Chapman because
Anna Chapman.
She was the pretty redhead.
Yeah.
But I had the guy, Don Heathfield, a.k.a. Andrei Bezhrikov, who was the guy operating out of Boston, who they made the Americans TV show on FX and whatnot. So, I mean, it was a very interesting case, and I had a lovely chat with Special Agent Strzok.
So you know the guy.
But it was about Russian spies.
Yeah,
and so
that was his
I'm
beat.
just, that was his beat. So that was like totally kosher. But why was he the guy on the emails?
They decided
they have a cyber division.
They have a cyber division.
It's not the espionage division. It's not counter espionage.
It's a good question, which I still don't understand exactly what was going on at headquarters. And the Horowitz investigation, which was the internal investigation into what happened during this time, is not clear on some of the stuff. You can see, if you read it, and I had to reread it again, it dodges some really important facts. And one of them is, where does McGonigal go? Like he gets the tip, and then he sort of disappears. No one consults with him about anything. There's no more, he's just gone from this report. And it's weird because he's still the cyber counterintelligence guy at HQ. Why is he not being consulted by Comey and everybody else? Because that's who they turn to. They turn to all the other people like Strzok and everyone. And Strzok ended up being the chief guy on the story. So, I don't want to cast any aspersions against these guys who are not in any not being questioned and who are not part of this McGonigal thing. But Strzok is an interesting character. He's it's bizarre to me, frankly, that they couldn't come up with a case put up against Donald Trump about him being connected to the Russian mob. I mean,
Yeah, you'd think you'd have started with, Felix Sater, Vyacheslav Ivankov, or
the condos that all these Russians owned in his buildings.
You mean how? It's funny, they did the Trump Russia thing, and nobody covered Dmitry Robovlev paying double for Trump's house in 2000.
No, they didn't cover a lot. And I'm glad you actually mentioned that, because there was actually a very good dossier. Some would say it wasn't well put together, but there was a dossier available of all the things that Donald Trump did that were not so good, in the past 30 years related to Russia. And they didn't really cover it. They sort of, the Steele dossier did show up at headquarters. There was a time when McCabe and Orr, who was the conduit to Christopher Steele, they set up a meeting with McCabe. They had a meeting, but everyone at headquarters kept downplaying Orr's role. Meanwhile, Orr was quite a sophisticated and connected guy when it comes to Russian counterintelligence. He worked at the Department of Justice, and he was Christopher Steele's big connection. In fact, they were trying to, at the time, convince Oleg Deripaska to move, to flip, to basically come to the American side. So the Steele dossier and its chain of possession, if you like, goes from Christopher Steele to Bruce Orr. Then Bruce Orr meets with Andrew McCabe, tells him about Christopher Steele, gives him all this good information, and it then gets to Peter Strzok. Peter apparently had already seen the copy of this thing, but nobody does anything about it. So they have this dossier, which is full of really robust information that they then end up ignoring in lieu of this one tip from Papadopoulos and their existing investigation, which was to track people like Flynn and Papadopoulos and Manafort.
I'm pretty sure it was in the application for Page's FISA, which was problematic.
Yes. But that was, other than that, if you read these fine documents here, this is the internal report from the IG. There's a lot of, there's a lot of comments in here that they met, that it was March 18th, or told us that he recalled only meeting with McCabe once concerning the Steele information. Once, really? Lisa Page was also present, or told us that he informed McCabe and Lisa Page about his background with Steele and the reporting Steele provided him. He stated he had told them that Steele and Simpson were hired by a private party to provide opposition research, but said he could not recall whether he specifically mentioned the Clinton campaign, or thought he also shared with them that Steele and Simpson were communicating with the others, and that their information was generated for a political client and not for the U.S. government. And then it also says that although Orr told us that he believed Steele and Simpson were communicating with the media, he said he could not recall whether he specifically mentioned that to McCabe and Lisa Page. That's just important for what comes up later on. But, it's just interesting that, and it does also declare in the second pink part here that he did provide Steele's previous employment background and talked about the issues concerning Russian oligarch one, which is Oleg Deripaska. The same guy that this McGonigal. Why do I always get chewed up by the name? Help me out. McGonigal. Sometimes I just can't get it. The same guy that he goes and works for, which is interesting. I mean, he goes and works for the same guy that Steele was connected to and Steele knew. But generally speaking, there are very nice things said about Christopher Steele in all of these, that he was quite good, actually. Imagine that. His material was solid, that he created all these great, lots of good sourcing, and he spoke to all the rights. He knew all the right oligarchs. He was well suited to this particular job, and yet publicly, Steele was like roasted by everybody. There's no ways that he was, he's treated awfully, and even Orr was sidelined by everybody. So it's just interesting that you had this guy who previously worked at MI6 or MI5. He was the head of the Russian
MI6.
desk. Yeah,
he was the top of the top desk in basically the top intelligence agency in the world. So
Yeah. And he gets sidelined by these guys who are, probably good, but don't have the kind of depth that he has in Russia. And basically just gets ignored. And then the one, the absolute stunner for me is this paragraph here, where they talk about, I think this is the right one. They talk about, we found that the first time the Crossfire Hurricane team accessed Steele's Delta file was in November 2016. The supervisory intel analyst told us that that someone was in contact with someone beginning in September and relied on him for information about Steele. Expressed surprise that the Crossfire Hurricane team did not access Steele's Delta file earlier. He said that the team should have turned that file upside down looking for information 2 months earlier, and that he assumed that some members of the team had thoroughly reviewed the file. Now, that doesn't seem right to me. I mean, I'm not a cop. I don't get this, but here's a dossier full of information about your biggest suspect. Here's the guy who's giving it to you, but you're not going back to check the history with the FBI.
So, I have a new thesis that's based on some of what you're talking about here. Of course, I've gone through the dossier with a very critical eye. As speaking as a professional analyst, in how how the fonts are, how the writing style is, and based on some of the predicate that the two main subsources were this young man Igor Danchenko, a Ukrainian/Russian national who basically looks like a Russian intelligence agent, and Chuck Dolan, who's a former Clinton administration guy who was at the top of a PR agency that represented the Kremlin. Ketchum. But there's so much duplicity going on here. And BuzzFeed was the one that publishes what they call is the dossier. If Steele really was on, team good guy here, or at least, writing material that is well sourced and is up to kind of the standards that one expects in an intelligence context, I'm wondering if what the BuzzFeed people put out as the Steele dossier, was that even the Steele dossier?
I think it was. I think that's generally believed to be a version of it. It might not have been. This thing felt to me like it was a live version.
Hold on. Stop right there.
Yeah.
It might have been a version of it. Then who edited it? Because when you're talking about like hack and leak stuff, you put some in that's fake, you leave some in that's real, and you take some out that says something other than what you want here. Because when they talk about the Steele's work product went into a FISA warrant, what they published in BuzzFeed just didn't strike me as professional intelligence analytic work. But what if it's not, and if it's a hack and leak job of its own, maybe the stuff that went into some of these FISA reports was up to snuff, did have the standards one would expect of, explaining some of the sourcing on that, so that you could look, FBI people and intelligence people, they have organized ways to communicate the credibility and history of credibility of each source. You can keep them anonymous, but you actually have ways of, like, you get a report card as a source, right?
I mean, they were sitting on this for 2 months. They're sitting on this dossier for 2 months without really checking they did try apparently, but according to the Senate Intelligence Committee, not very convincingly, they did try to check some of these sources. But it doesn't seem to me like they were like in it. They were like, oh, let's wave Steele off and let's see if we can chase down some of these sources. This is a highly credible agent with connections to all the oligarchs. This is not someone who's you would doubt necessarily. I mean, maybe he was, could have been compromised, but the fact that they didn't even do a fully as like a good enough job, a sufficient job in terms of vetting the documents. I mean, sure, some of it could have landed up in the FISA warrants, but it's not his fault that it wasn't vetted. It's their fault that they should have vetted it. I mean, he came to them with tips, and they didn't follow up on them.
And in terms of motive here, let's say that he's one of the world's reigning experts in Russian counterintelligence, which he is.
Yep.
and which he was and still is. He's maybe there's somebody today who's LeBron, but he's Michael Jordan. I mean, this is top of the heap here.
Yeah.
Let's say he's watching the discussion of Russia stuff and like his hair's on fire going, that is not what is happening. And then he puts a dossier together and hands it over to the right people, and they screw around with it because look, these are from the rest of the McGonigal story. I think the least we can say is these guys were screwing around with things they were not supposed to be doing. That one I feel really confident about. Meeting with Albanian intelligence while you're on the payroll of the United States and work for FBI counterintelligence. Nope.
Yeah, you just don't do that.
Against rules.
But also, if your colleagues at MI6 or your former colleague at MI6 arrives, and this is someone that you previously has helped you connect to other oligarchs, he's been the intermediary in the past for the FBI. Like, you wouldn't just like say, ignore the guy or toss him to the side. You would actually say, oh, this guy's got credibility here. He's got a history here. He knows all these people personally. Let's give him a shot here to see what he's got to say. Where they landed up sidelining him, not paying him after they saying they would, and he got totally scared and want to come back to the United States for a while. He did speak to George Stephanopoulos of ABC News, and sometimes it's just helpful to see what they say and the expressions on their face themselves. I think it speaks volumes for who he is.
Give me a declarative sentence. Christopher Steele is
a patriot, somebody who has professional integrity and expertise, and somebody who is a true friend and ally of the United States.
Steele authored the infamous Steele dossier. It presented some allegations about Russian interference which proved to be accurate, but others, including a salacious claim that the Russians may have had a video of Trump watching prostitutes in a Moscow hotel room, are either unproven or discredited. An investigation by the Justice Department's Inspector General showed that the source who gave Steele some of his key material, a Washington analyst, told the FBI much of it was rumor and speculation, including the supposed videotape recorded by Russia to blackmail Trump, what's known in Russia as compromat.
one of your main collectors spoke to the Inspector General, said that especially the compromat was word of mouth and hearsay, conversations with friends over beers. It was just talk.
If you have a confidential source and that confidential source is blown or is uncovered, that confidential source will often take fright and try and downplay and underestimate what they've said and done. And I think that's probably what happened here.
I mean,
yeah, they're dead.
Yeah, I mean, it's the Russians. You're not going to screw around with that. You know, they fall out of windows and all sorts of things to happen to them. You would be careful. And in this case, it makes sense to me that either these guys weren't the sources, because he knows all these people personally. He doesn't need to go to some guy in Virginia to be his source. He knows Oleg Deripaska. He knows him. He's, you know, like, it's not that hard to get information from the source. You wouldn't need to do all this stuff.
So my background is not signals intelligence. I wasn't like a naval technical guy, and I didn't work at the NSA. My background is human intelligence and developing networks and doing so over long periods of time. So, you know, this is apples to apples comparison. If you've been doing something on a singular topic like that, where for over 2 decades, where you were under what's known as official cover, where you're working as a diplomat out of the embassy, so that you can get out and develop sources like on the ground in Moscow, which is, by the way, hands down, not close, the most demanding, difficult, professional human intelligence gig that there is in the whole game. Mm-hmm. And he was there in the 80s doing that. And from what it looks like from his family background, like he was born in Yemen and his mom and dad were working for the meteorological service. Mm-hmm. When he was born in Yemen, I'm like, that's a spy family. I'm just guessing. Maybe they're super awesome meteorologists as well, but that's very exotic. It kind of says MI6. But anyways, then he rises through the ranks back at the main office and ends up as the head of all counter Russian intelligence. Over the course of that period of time, you would know hundreds of you'd know people personally, but you would be evaluating the dossiers put together by all of your network of analysts all over the world, and you would be in the position at that height, at the head like that, with that kind of top secret access. You've got access to who the sources are. That's what, when you go secret, top secret, sensitive compartment information, and then code word stuff, the further you get down into the fine code words and super controlled information, the super controlled part is like, okay, who's the guy who told us this? That's the stuff they protect, because if you don't protect it, people end up dead, and you got problems.
And he's protecting his sources. Of course he is. Sorry,
but he would also, yes, as a native response, but also he would not only have had his own personal sources that he could go out for a beer with or take a walk in the park with, he would have seen dossiers with hundreds to thousands of sensitive sources. And then we're to believe that the documents we saw from BuzzFeed and then the Inspector General's report, which I got some questions about now that you bring it up.
Me too. I was going to look at that.
He asked the guy in Alexandria. I'm like, you're in London, you're friends with oligarchs, and you literally should know the names of thousands of sensitive sources. And you go to Igor and Chuck in DC.
I mean, look, there are so many oligarchs living in London. The Russian scene there is pretty big. He does not need to go to someone in Virginia for any sourcing here. So that just is it can't be accurate. It just cannot be accurate that's where he could have probably spouted off all that stuff on his own as his own source before needing to go to any of these other two. That just doesn't strike me as being.
But what if BuzzFeed was a front for foreign intelligence, which I think it is? What if BuzzFeed was a front for foreign intelligence trying to besmirch his actual work?
Could be. Or
they did a pretty damn good job.
Yeah, I mean, they could. I mean, look, if you think about it, if you go back, Papadopoulos potentially sending up this concern around the Russians supporting Hillary with the emails. At the same time, there's a competing strain of evidence coming towards them, which is the Steele dossier. If you're wanting one to be more successful at launching the Trump-Russia investigation, you would discredit Steele and you would support Papadopoulos, right? I mean, that's from a narrative perspective, that's what you would do, and you'd get that to be the impetus for a foreign intelligence, investigation by the FBI. I've got a few minutes left here. I just want to. This is going to be a little long, but I'm going to read it to you anyhow because it is fascinating because it puts you in another mindset. This comes from my story that I wrote about Oleg Deripaska a while ago, but I'll read it as quickly as I can, and I'll get to the stuff that's really the most interesting. So, okay. In 2014, the Justice Department began a documented 2-year effort to recruit Deripaska as an informant as part of Operation Outreach. Intriguingly, it was former MI6 spy Christopher Steele, the famous author of the dossier, who approached DOJ to suggest potentially flipping Deripaska. So that's just an interesting note that's how far back that connection goes. It wasn't the first time Deripaska worked with the FBI. In 2009, the FBI enlisted the oligarch for an attempted rescue of Bob Levinson, the American held hostage in Iran. The mission didn't succeed, but Deripaska got enough information out of the Iranians to get what he wanted out of the deal, a legal U.S. visa. The recent effort to flip Deripaska began in earnest in September 2015. The Justice Department, Bruce Orr, met Deripaska to ask about Putin's ties to organized crime. Deripaska has reportedly rebuffed the advance, but by the beginning of 2016, the oligarch's rehabilitation was underway. We know this because the FBI helped Deripaska get another U.S. visa in February 2016. The oligarch was encouraged by the softening of the agency's stance, according to emails released by the Republican lawmakers. We reckon that forthcoming OVD, that's Deripaska, contact represents a good opportunity for the U.S. government. That's what Steele texted to Orr at the time. Keep in mind, this was all happening at the same time that Christopher Steele was writing his dossier. As it turns out, Steele had worked for Deripaska in 2012. While it's unclear if the two men were in direct contact, Deripaska was sending Steele messages through his U.S. lobbyist, Adam Waldman. Was Steele working for Deripaska? No one can say for sure, but FBI Director Christopher Wray refused to discuss it in an unclassified setting when Tom Cotton asked him of this. Later in February, Deripaska was the subject of a U.S. interagency meeting. Prior to that meeting, Steele shared sensitive documents which showed Putin was exerting pressure on the oligarchs and that Deripaska was not a tool, according to Steele. And then contacts between Steele, Deripaska, Waldman, and Orr continued almost all the way up until the election. The last contact was in September 2016. This is great. When Orr and Steele showed up unannounced at Deripaska's New York apartment. We think Russia is colluding with the Trump campaign, and we think Manafort is the key guy, a knowledgeable source told David Ignatius of the Washington Post. According to the source, Deripaska responded, "I hate Manafort, and I'm suing him." And we know at the time that was true, that he was doing that, but it was also possibly an artful dodge, because we know that Deripaska through Kalimnik was working with Manafort and getting all these updates. My point there is, the guys that are actually trying to stop all this, the guys that are going to talk to Deripaska and challenge him on this, are Steele and Orr. They're not Strzok and whomever at headquarters. In September 2016, these were the guys going confronting Oleg Deripaska.
Well, and the Trump Russia, story, about maybe, I don't know, he gets a hotel. Okay. But the real killer story in all of that is they hand the Republican National Committee, like, polling from that year, they hand that to a Russian spy who takes it back to Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's a whole bunch of this, the international interference in the American election that year. Some of it's Malaysian, a bunch of it's Saudi, a ton of it's Israeli.
Yeah.
Then there's a lot of Chinese stuff, but there was definitely Russian stuff too. And that is the real stuff. That would be the smoking gun, if you will. Is not, they control him because he got into some water sports with some prostitutes one time, blah, blah, blah. That is the damning stuff between the Trump campaign and Russia, as they took the prize jewels of the Republican National Committee polling and handed it to Kalimnik, who apparently had the skill set to know what the precinct by precinct data meant, which means he was a specialist in this. So that's the real stuff, and it sounds like that is what Steele was focusing on.
And both of those got sidelined, and Strzok gets a book deal and doesn't achieve very much out of the Operation Crossfire Hurricane. That didn't land anywhere. It didn't actually achieve anything. Comey gets a book deal. Comey gets several books, actually. Gets to go on TV and be a famous guy. Meanwhile, he was the guy inflaming all of this throughout the entire summer, talking about her emails. And that's
don't forget the Showtime movie.
Yeah. Oh, and the Showtime movie, making him look like a god. I mean, there's a lot of questions.
Oh, and him stroking his chin. It's so tough, and there's so many people at FBI who don't like her, and I'm just this really good guy, and
Yeah. It's clear that there's a lot more that needs to be looked at here. And I know the FBI is desperately trying to avoid this, but you can't. It's here. I mean, this story is massive, in my opinion. And the more I look at it, the more angles it has and the more disturbing aspects there are, that this could be a fairly widespread issue for them in headquarters. And maybe some of those people are gone now, but maybe they're not. Maybe there's others that are still there, and we need to clean the house, because if this is what they're used to doing. I don't want to go through this again in 24. I mean, I'm sure Joe Biden doesn't want to go through this in 24. I'm sure nobody does, except for baby Donald Trump. So
I'm just going quickly back through the Steele dossier, which is searchable, and it doesn't get into the real Manafort,
No, because that was happening almost live at the time. It's this almost at the same time that Steele and Orr would have gone and confronted Deripaska. Deripaska must have been like going to the meetings right afterwards to get the data from Kalimnik. I mean,
Manafort. That was August 8th, 2016, I believe.
Yes, and they came to confront him in September. So.
So that's but in this world, that's a month. That's a long time.
It's a long time, but
it's long enough to make it into the dossier. So if Steele is kicking around discussing Manafort and what he's up to, and he's got these other sources. And by the way, if Konstantin Kalimnik is running around Manhattan, who should be just on him all the time? FBI counterintelligence should have his phone tapped. And the stories that they came out with later were about how I believe Rick Davis is his business partner, Manafort's business partner, Rick Gates, thanks.
Yeah.
And used WhatsApp to send him to send Kilimnik the files of the Republican
They met at
polling
the
data.
Cuban place at the top of Jared Kushner's 666, and they met. This is Rudy's haunt. I mean, it's not like it was far to find out where the Russians go and hang out with their mob friends. I mean, it's what they do.
Yeah, and this is Russian counterintelligence desk in New York City. These are the most obvious, dudes possible. Like, if anyone's going to get a FISA thrown on them in perpetuity, it, hypothetically would be Paul Manafort, because he worked for Viktor Yanukovych.
Yeah.
So you want to know where he's at, but no one would. The media kept going, a Russian Slav sort of guy who was a florist, or who really liked gymnastics, and they left out Russian military linguist, which means spy 100% of the time. Like this, maybe the average poor reader of some of these terrible media outlets we have in this country might have been fooled by that, but anybody with expertise in counterintelligence who looks at Kilimnik goes, that guy's a Russian spy. It's a campaign year. He's hanging out with the campaign manager of the presidential election. Follow him.
It's vastly
tap
illegal.
his phone. Yeah. And so, were you telling me that Kilimnik was allowed to run around with consumer grade devices around Manhattan and upload data from the RNC and successfully send it over to Russia? And FBI counterintelligence didn't really pick up on that?
No, they did not. And in fact, the one guy who probably did, which was Steele, they weren't talking to because they weren't talking to because they decided it wasn't worth their time. So that's lots of questions right there. Hey, Eric, it's so nice to see you and hang out with you again. Tell everyone where they can see you on YouTube, because you have your own shtick up there. Tell us about it.
Just go look for Eric Garland. It's this, but not with as much conversation. So.
It's very good. It's very, very good. It's like tight little bits that are very, very interesting and tell you all about the world of intelligence plus the world of intelligence and everything that's going around the world.
You might get to my other channel that's Electric Bass. So if you want to know the secrets of the fretless bass, you've got that channel. And then if you want a teardown of how the 18 intelligence agencies work in the United States, we've got that for you too.
I highly recommend both. So thanks for being here tonight. It was really great to hang out, and we'll hopefully see you again soon. And for all of you at home, thank you for being here. Don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe to the Twitter feed, mine or Eric's, and keep in touch with us at patreon.com/narrative. We always appreciate your support, and we thank you very much for being here tonight. Have a good night, everybody. Every minute of Narrative's reporting, every story that we break is made possible by our patrons. You too can become a patron by joining at patreon.com/narrative.
Narrative, where truth lives.
Every minute of Narrative's reporting,
One day, you'll tell the story of autocrats, crooks, and kings who came for our freedom. A story of citizens who stood up to tyranny and won. The people prevailed and renewed an old vow to a more perfect union. And that was just the beginning. The story continues. Narrative.